The sky above New Eden was a tapestry of swirling purples and deep blues, a celestial canvas that seemed to shift and breathe with a life of its own. The twin suns, Helion and Selim, cast their golden light over the sprawling city, their rays filtering through the translucent domes that protected the inhabitants from the harshness of the alien world. New Eden was a marvel of human ingenuity and extraterrestrial collaboration, a city where the boundaries between species blurred and the impossible became routine. Dr. Elara Voss stood on the observation deck of the Xenobiology Institute, her sharp green eyes scanning the horizon. She was a woman of precision, her every movement calculated, her every word measured. Her auburn hair, streaked with silver, was pulled back into a tight bun, and her lab coat bore the faint scent of antiseptic and ozone. Elara was a pioneer in xenobiology, a field that had become increasingly vital since humanity's first contact with the Zynarians a decade ago. The Zynarians were a species of ethereal beauty, their skin a shimmering iridescent silver, their eyes large and luminous, reflecting the colors of their emotions. They were a peaceful race, their technology far surpassing humanity's, yet they had chosen to share their knowledge, forging an alliance that had transformed Earth and its colonies. But despite their advancements, there were still mysteries that eluded even the most brilliant minds. Elara's thoughts were interrupted by the soft chime of her communicator. She tapped the device embedded in her wrist, and a holographic image of her assistant, Jax, materialized before her. Dr. Voss, we've received a transmission from the Zynarian High Council. They're requesting your immediate presence at the embassy. Jax's voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of urgency that Elara couldn't ignore. Understood. I'll be there shortly, she replied, her mind already racing with possibilities. The Zynarians rarely made such direct requests, and when they did, it was usually a matter of great importance. As she made her way through the Institute's corridors, Elara couldn't shake the feeling that something monumental was about to happen. The air was thick with anticipation, the hum of activity around her a constant reminder of the delicate balance between the two species. She passed by labs filled with scientists working on hybrid technologies, classrooms where Zynarian and human children learned side by side, and gardens where bioluminescent plants from both worlds thrived. The Zynarian embassy was a structure of breathtaking beauty, its walls made of a crystalline material that refracted light into a kaleidoscope of colors. The entrance was flanked by two Zynarian guards, their silver armor gleaming in the sunlight. They nodded as Elara approached, their eyes glowing with a soft, welcoming light. Inside, the embassy was a sanctuary of tranquility. The air was filled with the faint scent of lavender and something else, something distinctly alien. The walls pulsed gently, as if alive, and the floor beneath her feet felt warm, almost like the touch of a living being. Elara was led to a chamber where the High Council awaited. The council consisted of 3 Zynarians, their presence commanding yet serene. In the center was High Counselor Zynara, her silver hair cascading down her back like a waterfall of light. To her left was Counselor Valen, his eyes a deep, contemplative blue, and to her right was Counselor Lyra, her expression one of quiet determination. Dr. Voss, thank you for coming. Zynara's voice was melodic, each word resonating with a harmony that seemed to echo in Elara's very soul. Of course, High Counselor. How may I assist you? Elara replied, her tone respectful yet curious. Zynara exchanged a glance with the other counselors before speaking. We have a matter of great importance to discuss, one that concerns both our species. It is a matter of reproduction. Elara's brow furrowed. Reproduction was a topic that had been explored extensively since the alliance began, but there were still many unknowns. The Zynarians had a unique biology, their reproductive processes vastly different from humans. Hybrid offspring were theoretically possible, but no successful cases had been documented. We have discovered something extraordinary, Zynara continued. A Zynarian female, one of our own, has become pregnant with a human child. But that is not all. Her daughter, also Zynarian, is carrying the same human's child. Elara's breath caught in her throat. The implications were staggering. This was not just a scientific breakthrough. It was a phenomenon that could redefine the relationship between their species. The room seemed to spin around her, the colors of the walls blending into a whirlwind of possibilities. How is this possible? Elara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. That is what we hope you can help us understand, Zynara replied. We need your expertise to study this miracle. But be warned, Dr. Voss, this knowledge comes with great responsibility. The child or children born from this union will be unlike anything either of our species has ever seen. Elara nodded, her mind already racing with questions and theories. This was the moment she had been preparing for her entire career. The chance to explore the unknown, to push the boundaries of science and understanding. I accept, she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions within her. I will do everything in my power to uncover the truth. Zynara's eyes glowed with a soft, approving light. Thank you, Dr. Voss. We will provide you with all the resources you need. But remember, this is not just a scientific endeavor. It is a journey into the very heart of what it means to be alive. As Elara left the embassy, the weight of the task ahead settled on her shoulders. The sky above New Eden seemed to shimmer with a new intensity, the twin suns casting long shadows that danced across the city. She knew that her life, and the lives of countless others, were about to change forever. The journey had begun. The lab was a symphony of light and sound, the hum of machines blending with the soft glow of holographic displays. Dr. Elara Voss stood at the center of it all, her hands moving with precision as she adjusted the settings on a DNA sequencer. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and the faint, metallic tang of alien biology. Around her, a team of human and Zynarian scientists worked in quiet harmony, their movements synchronized in a dance of curiosity and determination. The Zynarian mother and daughter, Lyria and Elara, were housed in a specially designed chamber within the lab. The walls of the chamber were made of a translucent material that allowed the scientists to observe them without intrusion. Lyria, the mother, was a vision of serenity, her iridescent skin glowing softly in the dim light. Elara, her daughter, was more restless, her luminous eyes darting around the room with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Elara had spent the first few days conducting a series of non-invasive tests, gathering data on the unique biological phenomenon that had brought them all together. The results were both fascinating and confounding. The human DNA present in both Lyria and Elara was identical, a perfect match to a sample provided by the Zynarian High Council. The implications were staggering. Somehow, the same human male had fathered children with both a Zynarian mother and her daughter. But as the days turned into weeks, the initial excitement began to wane, replaced by a growing sense of unease. The pregnancy was progressing at an alarming rate, far faster than any human or Zynarian gestation period. Lyria and Elara's bodies were undergoing rapid changes, their physiology adapting in ways that defied all known scientific principles. Elara found herself staring at the data, her mind racing to keep up with the ever-evolving puzzle. The emotional toll was equally daunting. Lyria, though outwardly calm, carried a quiet sadness in her eyes. She spoke little, her words measured and deliberate, as if each one carried the weight of the unknown. Elara, on the other hand, was more vocal, her youthful energy clashing with the gravity of their situation. She often questioned Elara, her voice tinged with a mix of fear and curiosity. Why is this happening to us? Elara asked one evening, her luminous eyes locking onto Elara's. What does it mean? Elara hesitated, her mind searching for an answer that would provide comfort without oversimplifying the truth. "We don't know yet," she admitted. "But we're doing everything we can to understand. You're not alone in this, Elara. We're all in this together." But the challenges were mounting. The rapid progression of the pregnancies was putting immense strain on Lyria and Elara's bodies. Elara and her team worked tirelessly to develop treatments to stabilize them, but each solution seemed to create new complications. The Zynarian biology was proving to be far more complex than anyone had anticipated, their cells responding unpredictably to human medical interventions. The emotional strain was equally taxing. Elara found herself haunted by the weight of responsibility, the knowledge that the lives of Lyria, Elara, and their unborn children rested in her hands. She spent long hours in the lab, her mind consumed by the endless stream of data and theories. Sleep became a luxury she could ill afford, her dreams filled with visions of failure and loss. The conflict escalated when the Zynarian High Council began to exert pressure on Elara and her team. The council, though supportive in public, was growing increasingly anxious behind closed doors. The birth of hybrid children was a delicate matter, one that could have far-reaching implications for both species. The council demanded results, their patience wearing thin as the days passed without a breakthrough. Elara found herself caught in a web of politics and science, her every move scrutinized by both the council and her peers. The pressure was relentless, a constant reminder of the stakes at hand. She knew that failure was not an option, but the path to success was shrouded in uncertainty. The turning point came one night, as Elara was reviewing the latest batch of data. She noticed a pattern, a subtle anomaly, in the DNA sequencing that had gone unnoticed before. It was a small detail, but it sparked a glimmer of hope. She called her team together, her voice filled with a renewed sense of purpose. "We've been looking at this the wrong way," she said, her eyes scanning the faces of her colleagues. "We've been trying to force Zynarian biology to conform to human models, but that's not the answer. We need to embrace the uniqueness of their biology, to work with it rather than against it." The team worked through the night, their energy fueled by the possibility of a breakthrough. Elara's new approach yielded promising results, the treatments showing signs of stabilizing Lyria and Elara's conditions. But the victory was short-lived. As dawn broke, a new challenge emerged. The Zynarian High Council had received word of a faction within their own ranks, a group that opposed the alliance with humanity. This faction saw the hybrid pregnancies as an abomination, a threat to the purity of their species. They had begun to spread dissent, their influence growing with each passing day. Elara knew that time was running out. The birth of the children was imminent, and the political landscape was becoming increasingly volatile. She found herself torn between her duty as a scientist and her growing attachment to Lyria and Elara. The emotional depth of the situation was overwhelming, the lines between professional and personal blurring with each passing moment. As she stood in the lab, watching the soft glow of the chamber where Lyria and Elara rested, Elara felt a surge of determination. She would not let fear or politics stand in the way of the truth. The journey was far from over, and the challenges ahead were daunting, but she was ready to face them head-on. The weight of discovery was heavy, but it was a burden she was willing to bear. For Lyria, for Elara, and for the future of both their species, she would push forward, no matter the cost. The lab had become a fortress, its translucent walls now reinforced with layers of energy shields and surveillance drones. The air inside was tense, a palpable undercurrent of anxiety threading through every conversation and every hurried step. Dr. Elara Voss moved through the space with a quiet urgency, her mind a whirlwind of calculations and contingencies. The stakes had never been higher, and the fragile balance she had worked so hard to maintain was beginning to crack. Lyria and Elara's conditions had stabilized, but only barely. The treatments Elara and her team had developed were holding, but the pregnancies continued to progress at an unnatural pace. Lyria's once serene demeanor had begun to fray, her luminous eyes now shadowed with exhaustion and fear. Elara, too, was struggling, her youthful defiance giving way to moments of quiet vulnerability. The weight of their shared burden was becoming too much to bear. Outside the lab, the world was fracturing. The Zynarian faction opposed to the alliance had grown bolder, their rhetoric more venomous. They called the hybrid pregnancies a desecration of the sacred, a betrayal of Zynarian purity. Their influence spread like a virus, infecting even those who had once been staunch supporters of the alliance. Protests erupted in the streets of New Eden, the once harmonious city now a battleground of ideologies. Elara had tried to shield Lyria and Elara from the chaos, but the walls of the lab were not impervious. News of the unrest filtered through, carried by the hushed whispers of the Zynarian guards and the grim expressions of the human staff. The emotional toll was evident in the way Lyria's hands trembled as she cradled her growing belly, in the way Elara's questions grew sharper, more desperate. "What will happen to us?" Elara asked one evening, her voice breaking the silence of the chamber. "If they hate us so much, what will they do when the children are born?" Elara had no answer, at least not one that would bring comfort. She could only offer reassurances that fell hollow even to her own ears. "We'll protect you," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging within her. "No matter what happens, we'll find a way." But the truth was, she wasn't sure they could. The Zynarian High Council, once their greatest ally, was beginning to waver under the pressure. Counselor Zynara had assured Elara of their support, but even her resolve seemed to be cracking. The political landscape was shifting, and Elara could feel the ground slipping out from under her. The breaking point came one night, as Elara was reviewing the latest data from Lyria's scans. The door to the lab hissed open, and Jax entered, his face pale and drawn. "Dr. Voss," he said, his voice low and urgent. "We have a problem." Elara turned, her heart sinking at the look in his eyes. "What is it?" "The faction," Jax replied. "They've infiltrated the embassy. They're demanding that Lyria and Elara be handed over to them. They're calling it a purification." Elara's blood ran cold. She had known the faction was dangerous, but she hadn't expected them to act so brazenly. "What's the council doing?" she asked, her voice tight with anger. "They're trying to negotiate," Jax said, "but it's not looking good. The faction has too much support. If the council doesn't comply, there could be an uprising." Elara's mind raced, her thoughts a chaotic jumble of fear and determination. She couldn't let this happen. She couldn't let Lyria and Elara fall into the hands of those who saw them as nothing more than a threat to be eliminated. "We need to move them," she said, her voice firm. "Somewhere safe, somewhere the faction can't reach them." Jax nodded, but his expression was grim. "Well, the entire city is on edge. There's nowhere they won't be found." Elara clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. She felt the weight of the world pressing down on her, the enormity of the task before her threatening to crush her resolve. But then she thought of Lyria, of Elara, of the lives growing within them, lives that represented the fragile hope of a future where two species could coexist. "There's one place," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The old research outpost in the northern wastes. It's abandoned, but it's secure. If we can get them there, we might be able to buy some time." Jax's eyes widened. "The wastes? That's a 3-day journey, and the terrain is treacherous." "Are you sure?" "No," Elara admitted, "but it's the only chance we have." The plan was set into motion with a quiet urgency. Elara and a small, trusted team prepared for the journey, gathering supplies and securing a transport vehicle. Lyria and Elara were informed of the plan, their reactions a mix of fear and reluctant acceptance. Lyria's voice was steady as she spoke, her words carrying a quiet strength. "We trust you, Dr. Voss," she said. Whatever happens, we know you've done everything you can. Elara, however, was less composed. What if they find us? She asked, her voice trembling. What if we don't make it? Elara knelt before her, her eyes meeting Elara's luminous gaze. We'll make it, she said, her voice firm. I won't let anything happen to you. I promise. The journey began under the cover of darkness, the transport vehicle slipping through the city's outskirts like a shadow. The northern wastes were a desolate expanse, a landscape of jagged cliffs and swirling storms. The air was thick with tension, every sound a potential threat, every shadow a possible enemy. As they traveled, Elara found herself reflecting on the fragile nature of the alliance, on the delicate balance that had been shattered by fear and prejudice. She thought of the children Lyria and Elara carried, of the hope they represented, a hope that now seemed so fragile, so easily extinguished. But she also thought of the resilience of life, of the way it found a way to thrive even in the harshest conditions. The wastes were a testament to that, a place where life clung stubbornly to existence, defying the odds. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, the outpost came into view, a stark, angular structure rising from the barren landscape. Elara felt a surge of relief, but was tempered by the knowledge that their journey was far from over. The real battle was just beginning. The outpost was a relic of a bygone era, its metal walls pockmarked by years of exposure to the harsh elements of the northern wastes. Inside, the air was stale, carrying the faint scent of rust and decay. Dr. Elara Voss stood in the dimly lit control room, her hands resting on the edge of a console as she stared at the flickering holographic display. The journey to the outpost had been grueling, but the real challenge was only beginning. Lyria and Elara were settled in a makeshift medical bay, their conditions monitored by a skeletal crew of human and Zynarian scientists who had volunteered for the mission. The chamber was sparse, its walls lined with outdated equipment that Elara and her team had spent hours recalibrating. The pregnancies were advancing at an alarming rate, and the strain on Lyria and Elara's bodies was becoming unbearable. Elara could see it in their eyes. The fear, the exhaustion, the quiet desperation. Lyria, ever the stoic, bore her pain with a dignity that left Elara in awe. But even she had her limits. Elara, younger and less accustomed to suffering, was struggling to hold herself together. Her questions had grown fewer, her voice softer, as if she were retreating into herself. The emotional toll was evident in the way Lyria's hand trembled as she reached for Elara's, in the way Elara's luminous eyes flickered with a mixture of hope and despair. Elara felt the weight of their trust pressing down on her, a burden she carried with both pride and trepidation. Outside, the wastes were alive with the howling of the wind and the crackle of distant storms. The outpost's energy shields held, but they were a fragile barrier against the chaos beyond. The factions' reach was long, and Elara knew it was only a matter of time before they discovered their location. The thought sent a shiver down her spine, but she pushed it aside, focusing on the task at hand. The medical data streaming in from Lyria and Elara's monitors was a labyrinth of contradictions. Their bodies were adapting in ways that defied all known biology, their cells rewriting the rules of life itself. Elara spent hours poring over the data, her mind racing to keep up with the ever-evolving puzzle. She felt like she was standing on the edge of a precipice, staring into an abyss of unknowns. "We're running out of time," Jack said, his voice breaking the silence of the control room. He stood beside her, his arms crossed, his expression grim. "If we don't find a way to stabilize them soon." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Elara knew what was at stake. She had seen the scans, the way Lyria and Elara's bodies were being pushed to their limits. The pregnancies were progressing too quickly, their systems struggling to cope with the strain. If they didn't find solutions soon, the consequences would be unthinkable. "We need to think outside the box," Elara said, her voice firm despite the exhaustion weighing on her. "We've been approaching this from a human perspective, but maybe that's the problem. Maybe we need to embrace the Zynarian biology, to work with it rather than against it." Jax frowned. "What are you suggesting?" Elara hesitated, her mind racing through the possibilities. "What if we use Zynarian technology to create a symbiotic environment? Something that can support their bodies while allowing the pregnancies to progress naturally." Jax's eyes widened. "You're talking about a biointerface. That's risky. We've never attempted anything like that before." "I know," Elara admitted, "but we're out of options. If we don't try something radical, we're going to lose them." The decision was made with a quiet urgency. The team worked through the night, their movements fueled by a desperate determination. The biointerface was a delicate construct, a fusion of Zynarian and human technology that required precision and care. Elara oversaw every step, her hands steady despite the storm raging within her. As the first light of dawn filtered through the outpost's narrow windows, the biointerface was ready. Lyria and Elara were placed within its embrace, their bodies connected to a network of glowing filaments that pulsed with a soft, rhythmic light. The chamber hummed with energy, the air thick with anticipation. Elara stood at the edge of the chamber, her heart pounding in her chest. She watched as the biointerface activated, its light enveloping Lyria and Elara in a warm, golden glow. For a moment, there was silence, the world holding its breath. Then the monitors began to stabilize. The erratic spikes and dips in Lyria and Elara's vitals evened out, their bodies responding to the symbiotic environment. Elara felt a surge of relief, but it was tempered by the knowledge that this was only a temporary solution. The real challenge was still ahead. The faction was out there, their hatred a storm on the horizon. The birth of the children was imminent, and the political landscape was more volatile than ever. Elara knew that the fragile peace they had achieved within the outpost could shatter at any moment. As she stood in the dim light of the chamber, watching the gentle rise and fall of Lyria and Elara's chests, Elara felt a quiet resolve settle over her. They had come this far, defying the odds and pushing the boundaries of what was possible. She would not let fear or doubt stand in the way of the future they were fighting for. The storm within her was still raging, but she had found her anchor. For Lyria, for Elara, and for the children they carried, she would face whatever came next. The journey was far from over, but she was ready to meet it head-on. The outpost was a fortress no longer. The energy shields flickered weakly, their once impenetrable glow now dim and erratic. The howling winds of the northern wastes had grown into a deafening roar, carrying with them the distant hum of approaching ships. The faction had found them. Dr. Elara Voss stood in the control room, her hands gripping the edge of the console as she stared at the holographic display. The blips on the screen were unmistakable, dozens of vessels, their trajectories converging on the outpost. The time for hiding was over. The time for fighting had come. Lyria and Elara were in the medical bay, their condition stabilized but fragile. The biointerface had bought them time, but it was a temporary solution. The pregnancies were nearing their end, the children within them ready to enter a world that was not yet ready to receive them. Elara could feel the weight of their impending arrival like a storm gathering on the horizon. "We need to evacuate," Jax said, his voice tight with urgency. "If we stay here, we're sitting targets." Elara shook her head, her eyes never leaving the display. "We can't move them. Not now. The biointerface is the only thing keeping them stable. If we disconnect them, we risk everything." Jax's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He knew as well as she did that there were no good options left. The faction's ships were closing in, their weapons primed and ready. The outpost's defenses were no match for their firepower. Elara turned to face him, her expression resolute. "We'll hold them off as long as we can." By Lyria and Elara every second we can spare." Jax nodded, his eyes reflecting the same determination that burned within her. "We'll make them fight for every inch." The outpost's small crew mobilized with a quiet efficiency, their movements fueled by a desperate resolve. The energy shields were reinforced, the few defensive weapons they had brought online. Elara moved through the chaos with a calm she didn't feel, her mind focused on the task at hand. The first wave of attacks came with a deafening roar, the outpost shaking under the impact. The energy shields held, but barely. Elara watched from the control room as the faction's ships circled like predators, their weapons firing in relentless volleys. The outpost's defenses returned fire, but it was a losing battle. In the medical bay, Lyria and Elara lay connected to the bio-interface, their bodies bathed in its golden light. Lyria's eyes were closed, her breathing steady but shallow. Elara, however, was awake, her luminous eyes fixed on Elara as she entered the chamber. "Is it time?" Elara asked, her voice trembling. Elara knelt beside her, taking her hand in hers. "Not yet," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "But soon. You're both so strong. Just hold on a little longer." Elara's grip tightened, her fear palpable. "What if we don't make it?" Elara met her gaze, her own eyes filled with a quiet determination. "You will. I promise." The outpost shuddered again, the sound of metal groaning under the strain. The energy shields were failing, their light flickering like a dying star. Elara knew they were running out of time. She returned to the control room, her mind racing. The faction's ships were closing in, their weapons locking onto the outpost's weakened defenses. Elara's hands moved over the console, her fingers flying as she input a series of commands. The outpost's core reactor hummed to life, its energy reserves diverted to the shields. "What are you doing?" Jax asked, his voice sharp with alarm. "Buying us time," Elara replied, her voice calm. "The reactor can't handle this much strain for long, but it might be enough." The shields flared back to life, their light blinding as they absorbed the faction's attacks. The outpost held, but the strain was evident. Alarms blared, their shrill cries echoing through the corridors. In the medical bay, Lyria's eyes fluttered open, her voice a soft whisper. "It's time." Elara felt a surge of panic, but she pushed it aside. She moved to Lyria's side, her hands steady as she disconnected her from the bio-interface. Elara followed, her movements slow but determined. The outpost shook again, the sound of metal tearing echoing through the chamber. The shields were failing, their light dimming with each passing second. Elara knew they had only moments left. "We need to get them out of here," Jax said, his voice urgent. Elara nodded, her mind racing. "There's an escape pod in the lower level. It's our only chance." They moved quickly, their movements fueled by desperation. The outpost was crumbling around them, the sound of explosions growing closer. The escape pod was small, barely large enough for the four of them, but it was their only hope. As they reached the pod, the outpost's shields finally failed, the sound of metal crashing echoing through the corridors. The faction's ships were closing in, their weapons firing in a relentless barrage. Elara helped Lyria and Elara into the pod, her hands trembling as she secured them in their seats. Jax followed, his movements quick and efficient. The pod's door hissed shut, its engines humming to life. The outpost was collapsing around them, the sound of destruction growing louder. Elara input the coordinates for New Eden, her fingers flying over the console. The pod's engines roared to life, their light blinding as they launched into the storm. The last thing Elara saw before the pod shot into the sky was the outpost crumbling into the wastes, its light extinguished. The faction's ships turned to pursue, but the pod was faster, its engines pushing it beyond their reach. Inside the pod, Lyria and Celera lay connected to the biointerface, their bodies bathed in its golden light. The children within them were moments from entering the world, their arrival a beacon of hope in the darkness. Elara felt a surge of relief, but it was tempered by the knowledge that the journey was far from over. The faction would not stop, their hatred a storm that would follow them wherever they went. But as she looked at Lyria and Celera, at the lives they carried within them, Elara felt a quiet resolve settle over her. They had defied the odds, pushed the boundaries of what was possible. The future was uncertain, but it was a future worth fighting for. The pod shot through the storm, its light a beacon in the darkness. The birth of tomorrow was upon them, and Elara knew that no matter what came next, they would face it together. The journey was far from over, but they were ready to meet it head-on.